A conversation with Wisconsin Congressman Ron Kind this morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. There is never a shortage of issues about which to discuss with Wisconsin's 3rd District Congressman Ron Kind. If nothing else, his seat on the House Ways and Means Committee ensures that. So I'm pleased that visiting us from La Crosse today is our 3rd District Congressman, Ron Kind. Congressman, welcome back.
Thanks, Neil.
It's been a while.
Good morning. Glad to be with you again.
Good to have you. Good to have you on. Yeah. Just if you would start, just giving us a sense. We are all focused so much on the atmosphere in Washington, on the politics of it, of the divisiveness of it. Just going to work every day. What's your mindset?
Well, first of all, it shouldn't have to be this difficult, but it has become very hyper-partisan, very polarized, and dysfunctional as a result, which is really too bad, because I don't think the representatives in Washington are doing justice with the people that we're responsible to represent back home here. There is a lot of common ground out there, but it requires increased communication skills, sitting down, listening to each other, working hard to find that common ground so we can move forward. And there are a lot of pressing issues, but I hope we keep the focus on a recovering economy, because a growing economy solves a lot of problems. We're not there yet. Progress has been made with job growth recently. We need the wages now to start catching up so working families feel a little bit more secure in their lives. But that's got to remain our #1 priority right now.
And can you point to some examples, Congressman, where the federal government is aiding in that recovery, or are you suggesting that it is happening despite a dysfunctional Congress?
I think the bar's been lowered as far as expectations, that you just don't want to see something dysfunctional coming out of Washington these days that could hurt or hinder the economic recovery. So getting a full-year budget bill passed at the end of last year is helpful. Not defaulting on our financial obligations is good. But there are also certain key investments that we ought to be making as a great nation to set the next generation up for success. It's the investment in quality educational opportunities. And you see the debate that's raging in Wisconsin right now that could jeopardize the reputation of our university system with deep budget cuts that could hold students back and not allow them to develop the skills they need to be competitive in a 21st century global economy. It's the infrastructure modernization that we're falling further and further behind. We need a new infrastructure bill that would also create good paying jobs, but also lay the foundation for long-term sustainable economic growth. And other measures that can help us be more competitive in a global environment. Those are issues that typically have had bipartisan support. We just need to figure a path to get there again.
Well, before this half hour is up, I want to talk about trade issues and student debt issues and the Highway Trust Fund, but because they all are examples of what government can or can't do, and examples of sort of the divisiveness, I think, that we see in politics right now about what the role of government is. But there is a very good example this past week with the hearings on VA legislation that you had a part of in Toma.
Yeah.
Tell me how that went, and if we are getting any closer to recognizing what went wrong there and how we can fix it.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that the respective committees in Congress came to Toma to hold a field hearing, and that just took place this week. And it was very powerful, very emotional, personal stories that we heard from family members of deceased veterans who were under the care and treatment at Toma. These allegations are very seriously. It's an all hands on deck moment, not only to fix whatever problem might exist at Toma, so our veterans are getting the care and treatment that they earned and that they deserve, but that we're doing this system-wide throughout the entire VA system. Because I don't think the problem we have with pain management practices at Toma is just unique to that facility. We've got a problem throughout the entire healthcare system. And that's why earlier this week, Representative Reed Ribble here in Wisconsin and I teamed up to introduce this Pain Management Improvement Act, which would establish pain management boards, a more collaborative approach to pain management, so that there's multiple eyes on it and peer review of these files, so that it's not just one person's decision and that shuts down all conversation. So there are, I think, protocols of care and best practices that we should be implementing, but this should be done throughout the entire system, and hopefully that will prevent tragedies like we heard this week from those testifying families from occurring again, whether it's in Toma or anywhere else through the country.
Is the the inability, the difficulty in embracing best practices around palliative care, just as an example. Is that a failure of the government bureaucracy, or are there other issues at work here?
Well, I don't want the narrative to appear as if it's all bad at TOMA or in the VA system. TOMA, as an example, they typically rank in the top 10% when it comes to quality measurements and metrics, but clearly there are problems there, especially this alleged culture of intimidation or coercion that may have developed that we've got to fix, and that is inexcusable. But this is something I think that the overall healthcare system has been wrestling with, is collecting the data that we need so we know what works and what doesn't work when it comes to proper pain management practices. What complementary forms of medicine or alternative forms of medicine are more appropriate given that individual circumstance. But the problem, Neil, it's not an exact science. People's pain threshold will be different from individual to individual. One of the attributes of TOMA is they do receive some of the toughest cases, and these are veterans that oftentimes come with not only physical but emotional needs that have to be addressed. But it's still not an excuse for some of the instances that we see coming out of TOMA.
Maybe a better example is the problems that arose with discovery of some of these issues, reporting some of these issues, and investigating some of these issues.
Yeah.
Reassure us, Congressman, that this is being dealt with appropriately.
Well, first and foremost, anyone working within the VA system, whether it's a doctor, a nurse, a staff person, should feel confident that if they see something that's not right, they can come forward with that information without fear of retribution or possibly losing their job. And that hasn't always been the case.
Because the report you got was anonymous.
That's right. Well, the report I received was an anonymous complaint alleging some of these things that I immediately forwarded on to the Inspector General's office, where it should have gone. And that helped precipitate a 2-year investigation. The problem at the end of that investigation is they had concluded it, they had done a report, but they didn't publish it, and they didn't notify anyone, including myself, which is inexcusable. I mean, we should be kept in the loop as far as these reports and what recommendations they want to see implemented at TOMA or somewhere else. So now we had the Office of Inspector General at the hearing this week. They were grilled. There were a lot of tough questions asked them. They did concede that mistakes were made. They have agreed going forward to publish every report and also to notify the appropriate offices when they do finish a report, whether action is taken or warranted or not. And this is the type of communication that has to be enhanced.
I think that was an appropriate response on behalf of administration, but is there also a role here where members of Congress who were notified of this, who got these reports, should have been more aggressive in having them investigated?
Yeah, clearly. I mean, if a veteran is having a problem, and this happens daily, where they can contact a congressional office, with their permission, we can open up a case file and intervene on their behalf in that. But, and I can't speak to the notification that other offices received, but unless there's a request for help or assistance, it's tough to move forward on it. Because of what you need from the other party at that point. But this, I think, and to the whistleblowers' credit, they've been asking everyone to elevate their game, not just at the VA, not just at the Inspector General, but everyone who has some type of role to play of enhancing policy and making sure our veterans are receiving the care that they need. So it's a wake-up call. And I'm glad, again, the committees came out and that they're providing this type of focus on what I think is a major issue throughout the healthcare system.
When we come back, I want to talk about a topic important to many people in La Crosse and Madison, and that's student debt. Yeah. We'll do that right after this. My guest this morning is 3rd District Wisconsin Congressman Ron Kind. Congressman Kind is a member of the House Ways and Means Committee. And we'll talk about some of the issues that are in Ways and Means, but student debt is something that I know that you have been involved in, and it's one of the things that I think is contributing to sort of the income inequality that we're seeing in this state, and it's probably contributing to some competitive issues that we're facing with who can afford to go to college. Help us understand what Congress can do to address this issue.
Neil, I've always believed that there's 2 great equalizers in our society here in this country. One is educational attainment, the other is voting. And right now we see both under assault right now here in Wisconsin, which is very troubling. Take the student debt issue. Right now nationwide, $1.2 trillion worth of student debt has been accumulated. It exceeds all credit card debt for the first time in our nation's history. I don't want this to be the next economic bubble that goes off and brings the economy down with it. Typical undergraduate in Wisconsin, by the time they finish school, roughly $28,000 worth of debt. It's a deep financial hole for them to have to start climbing out of. And it's partly because of the policy decisions that are being made right now, whether it's a proposed $300 million cut to the university budget here in Wisconsin, which will leave more students behind and possibly force students out of state so they can get educated and live and learn somewhere else. But also decisions coming out of Washington. We could be much more supportive in helping students finance higher education, especially those that don't have the means themselves. And that's why I earlier this year proposed a higher education affordability bill to make it easier for students to manage the debt, to make it easier for them to consolidate and refinance at a lower rate, peg the repayment period to their income level, so that their income goes up, their debt repayment can go up a little bit, and then vice versa if it does come down. But starting with Congress not raising money off from the backs of these students through interest rates that are higher than what's needed to pay for the program. Very common sense proposals that hopefully we'll be able to advance in this session. But it's more than just the student loan issue. It's the reduction in Pell Grant availability for students, work-study availability on campuses. And I'm a living example. As a kid who grew up on the north side of La Crosse who went on to school, I had to do it through loans. I had to take out student loans. I also qualified for Pell Grants. And I still hold, I think, the undergraduate career record for most toilets cleaned, a work-study program. It was the most disgusting job on campus.
How did you draw that gig?
But, you know, it paid the best under work-study, and it helped me be able to afford my educational expenses. So there are things we can be doing to enhance educational opportunities for all our students. But I think Wisconsin's on the verge of taking a huge step backwards. If we develop the reputation as a state of not valuing education and higher education, that's going to leave us as in a less competitive position, not only with our neighboring states in the upper Midwest, but throughout the world right now.
Now, recognizing that you don't have any direct control over tuition, but certain policies that you implement may affect decisions about tuition. Is tuition a concern to you?
Well, it is. And again, you talk to the universities. I have 6 of the 11 state universities in my congressional district. I'm always on campus. I'm always asking, what are they doing to make higher education more affordable to the students? And they're in the process of developing those metrics, accountability. They're not shying away from that responsibility, and we all have a role to play in it. And we need to help students and their families to make better purchasing decisions when it comes to their education too. A better rating system that goes from school to school to school, graduation rates, placement rates, things of that nature. But one thing that Wisconsin has always enjoyed for many, many years is our ability to bring in federal research dollars to our campuses. That has helped supplement the cost of higher education. But with these deep cuts that's being proposed in the state budget, we're already starting to lose some of our best researchers to neighboring states or to other parts of the country. And that's going to make it harder for us to be able to bring those dollars back in the state, for us to go forward on groundbreaking discoveries and new opportunities to spin off to create businesses and whole industries, whether it's through WARF, WISIS, or what have you.
Rather than just give you 30 seconds to answer a question on trade and farm policy, let's take a break right now. We'll get to those when we come back with Congressman Ron Kind right after this. I am back for the most difficult session of this half hour with Congressman Ron Kind, and that's deciding what we can cover and what we're going to have to leave out.
Well, first let's cover Go Badgers.
Yeah, well, I was going to start with that. I mean, here we don't know the results of Saturday night's game.
Exciting,
but we will assume that La Crosse native Bronson Koenig.
A little shout out to our pride and joy from La Crosse. Bronson Koenig who's really stepped up and done a great job. The whole team, though, the chemistry, the players, how well they've come together. They've developed a knack to how to win the big games, especially in the second half. And hopefully, they'll be able to deliver the goods.
It's fun to hear Wisconsin talked about the way Wisconsin's talked about because of those kids and because of the university.
That's right, yeah.
It's kind of the way we want to be known, I think.
That's the reputation we want to develop as a state, and one that we have enjoyed in the past, so we need to get there.
Because trade reform is in-house Ways and Means, and it's something that you feel strongly about and have oftentimes been criticized for.
Yeah.
Talk about trade bills coming up.
Well, we have two major negotiations taking place, one involving the Pacific Rim nations called Trans-Pacific Partnership, the 12 countries, including ourselves. That's the fastest growing region of the world right now. Of course we need to be in that tent. We need to enable our workers, our businesses, our farmers to be as competitive as they need to be so we can get into those expanding markets. And that's what these negotiations are about, trying to elevate standards up to our level and create a level playing field so our workers and businesses can compete through core international labor and environmental standards, intellectual property protection. And then you also have the negotiations with the European Union. And between the two regions, that's 2/3 of the global marketplace. We should be at the table establishing those rules of trade, because if we're not, trade is still going to be going on, with those countries, but it's going to be on someone else's terms. Either no rules, which means a race to the bottom, we can't compete in that world, or, God forbid, a global trading system dominated by China's rules. And they would love nothing better than to step into the vacuum, establish the rules of trade themselves, and then having us try to compete on their turf rather than the other way around.
Since the argument is losing jobs overseas, you must believe that this is good for the 3rd Congressional District and the businesses in Southwest Wisconsin.
Well, and for the state as a whole.
Yep.
And for the state as if you look at the 20 bilateral trade agreements that we are currently in, we're actually running a trade surplus with those countries in manufacturing, in agriculture, in services. It's the countries we don't have trade agreements with that get us into trouble because there are no rules governing trade. And they have virtual unlimited access to our market right now, where we're trying to break down trade barriers to our goods and our products that are made right here in Wisconsin. So I approach this looking at one of 3 viable options. One, a global trading system with no rules, with China's rules or our rules. And it just seems to make sense to me that we ought to be at the table negotiating the best standards, the best rules that we can get.
Why don't we do this? The 3 things coming up this year, debt limit ceiling, again, another fiscal cliff possibility, the Highway Trust Fund, and the budget. All of these things are in jeopardy. I mean, we're anticipating really contentious debate because of the state of politics. Why don't we start with what can we do to fix politics today,
Well, if I had a magic wand, there would be some structural changes. First, we need to get the dark money out of these political campaigns because their influence is pervasive. The powerful special interests and what they're able to buy these days has never been greater under Citizens United.
It'll influence all 3 of these things.
Absolutely, and every decision that's being made, whether it's in Madison or in Washington these days. I'd love to see a different way of drawing the political map. The redistricting is loading up these districts, whether it's heavily Republican or heavily Democratic, and that's further polarizing the electorate then and the representatives. So it's hard to get back to the middle where consensus can be developed. But it also comes back to just basic communication skills, sitting down and listening to each other, developing a level of trust. And I've found through the years that when you do listen to each other, there is some common ground that can be had. We've gotten away from that for a variety of reasons, but we need to get back because the dysfunction in our political system, I think, is holding us back as a nation right now, and the type of economic growth and the opportunities that should be there for all our citizens.
But have you paid a political price for your membership in the New Democrat Coalition and, in fact, your leadership of the New Democrat Coalition?
Yeah, I've had the honor of chairing the New Democratic Coalition. It's a group of 48 more moderate, centrist, pro-growth Democrats, and we are trying to find a path forward, how to get things done. But yeah, when you stake out those type of positions, not only do you get hit from the right, but oftentimes from the left too. And that makes it difficult to develop some consensus, especially in the middle of the political spectrum. And that's where the work is ultimately going to have to get done. We need to get to a spot where the extremes on either side isn't trying to drive the agenda all the time or try to take out those who are trying to find the common ground that is lacking these days.
So if we just use an example, the most recent bill that you introduced with, among others, Republican Reed Ribble from Wisconsin. The fact that this is a bipartisan bill, I mean, with those 2 names on it, what's the likelihood of it getting through the Congress?
Well, I hope it's strong, because it's something that makes sense, and it should be done to improve the VA system and our veterans' health care. But, you know, Reed Rebel and I and a few others have introduced legislation, the Pain Management Improvement Act, which really speaks to the problems that we hear coming out of TOMA right now. And you know, the care and the treatment of our veterans should be nonpartisan. I mean, that's the last place you want to go, is turning that into a political issue, because it's a disservice not only to the veterans, but to the country as a whole. We owe them a debt of gratitude that can never be repaid. Yeah. And they deserve a governing body that recognizes that and are willing to come together and set aside differences for their sake and for our country's sake.
There was a story a couple of weeks ago, Congressman, another waste in federal government story, $560, I think, billion in wrong payments, Medicaid, Social Security payments. What is the problem with government being able to efficiently provide these services?
Well, you know, part of it is making sure the agencies have the resources that can do a better job of tracking and monitoring and upgrading the databases. I mean, one of the stories was the fact that there were Social Security payments still going out to deceased individuals. Right. That's a technology problem. That's a computer problem. And yet Congress, in this era of austerity, of cut here, cut now, cut everything across the board regardless of consequences, is setting these agencies up for failure then, whether it's the Social Security Administration, whether it's the IRS right now, whether it's the INS in charge of the immigration system. We have a hard time tracking people that legally enter this country because of the technology that the INS has to work with right now. So there are some smart investments that we can be making that doesn't cost a whole lot, that would improve the system and these programs against the waste and the fraud that exists. But there is a good news story there too. With the passage of the Affordable Care Act and health care reform, we stepped up the enforcement budget and the enforcement agencies to crack down on Medicare fraud. And so in recent years, we've been able to recoup billions of dollars that normally would have been lost to fraud, but because of the outreach centers and the investigative teams that are out there right now to crack down on this one area that has been terribly inefficient.
All right, so take the last 30 seconds to help us feel optimistic as we head into an election year with so many important issues coming up.
The economy's coming back. A growing economy solves a lot of problems. We have 68 consecutive months of private sector job growth. If we hit 200,000 Friday this week, that'll be 13 consecutive months of over 200,000 new jobs being created. We just need the wages now to start catching up, and for the families to feel more secure and more confident, which can also help propel economic growth and the good job creation that we need right now.
Congressman Kind, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. We're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next Sunday on For the Record.